Hello, welcome back. This is forecaster Dante V. Brown Royal from the Weather Advanced Storm Prediction Center here talking to you about here's another update as we go forward on our Path to Winter series. This is episode 3, and as promised, we're going to go into what some of the Farmers Almanacs or some forecasts that are out there so far. These are two more nationally accredited forecasts from the Farmers Almanac and the Old Farmers Almanac. And I would take this as a grain of salt because sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. So, but what we are going to do is we're going to look at this in the next few minutes, and we're going to analyze that and see where, if we can see what some of the differences so far this year compared to last year's. As pertains to temperature wise. So they're just little things that we're going to look at to see if maybe there's some things that we can compare that might agree to a degree with the Farmer's Almanac or disagree. Okay, so with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Okay, so first off, we're going to hit with the Farmer's Almanac for the 2023 year. And this is from farmersalmanac.com. You can find it there. We don't take any credit for it. Please don't give us a copyright strike on this. This is what we found, and we take no credit for it. This is not our forecast. This is the Farmer's Almanac forecast. But one thing that we here at Weather Advance were primarily focused on the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, and a few of the southeastern states. So that's where most of our attention is going to be throughout this winter. However, what we're going to look at brisk, normal precipitation. You'll see mostly out to the Pacific Northwest, drier than normal. Well, what else is new as it pertains to the Pacific Southwest? And they really need an El Nino year to just kind of help out with their drought situation in the Pacific Southwest. But looking at some of the long-range models, it's possible next year could be an El Nino year, but we've seen that a couple times. Typically, after you get a strong La Nina or even a weak La Nina, it will flip the other way. It hasn't happened like that in the past few years. This is a rarity that this is the third year in a row that we're going to be walking into what we project to be a La Nina winter for this year. It's going to be cold. You head into the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes. Cold and unreasonably cold and snowy, according to them, in the Great Lakes region. Slushy ice and snowy, which you would think that means typically that you'll have a lot more mixed precipitation. Some storms coming up the coast, and then wet and cooler than normal. And the nation's Sunbelt region. So that's what the Farmer's Almanac 2023 says. Let's take a look at this is the old Farmer's Almanac. Now, we take no credit for this at all. We found this on bringmethenews.com. They have a ton of great content over there. I would encourage everybody to go take a look at that site if they get an opportunity. This is the old Farmer's Almanac's winter forecast, and it pretty much it's cold. You would almost look at a storm track pretty much similar to that. That's pretty much what you're seeing with that, because everything is mild in the west, mild and dry, or mild and snowy, mild and wet. But what you're seeing in the south is cold and dry, colder and wet, cold and snowy as you head up into areas, as you think about the Kentucky, and as you think about things like Kentucky and Tennessee and Arkansas, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, even into the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, cold and snowy. Cold and snowy in the upper Midwest as well, for North and South Dakota and Montana. So these are just a couple things that these two sites, and mild and dry if you're in Alaska or Hawaii. These are a couple of different almanacs that we have, that that have released their winter outlooks for the 2022-2023 winter season. And one thing that I will say is in common, they both have the eastern half of the nation colder, a lot more wintry precipitation than they typically have in a La Nina year. You typically do not have cold, well, at least snowy situations in the eastern half of the nation. So that's something that is worth noting. Now, what we're going to do is this is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. We're going to take a look at this is a three-peat year as it pertains to a La Nina. I try to look at patterns and see if, hey, is this year trending a little different than the last year? And just to see if it's going to follow the pattern of, and not every weather pattern is the same, but what is, if one anomaly adds up to another anomaly, or one analog year adds up really nicely with another, you can kind of get a gauge of what should happen based off of certain situations. Not all the time, but this is just something fun. It's still early, something that we can look at, all right? Now, in 2020, we did have a La Nina year that winter, and you had average temperatures in the south, but you could see really everywhere else it was at least a couple degrees warmer than average, especially as you head up into the big cities of the Northeast and in the Pacific Southwest. And then if you head off into the Pacific Northwest, it was a little bit cooler than average for the most part as well. Now, if you go into last year, between June and August of 2021, most of the West was warmer than average. If some of y'all remember, last year we had a really big ridge that came up. Heat was in the 90s and hundreds, was going way up into areas of Canada, and areas in Washington and Oregon and stuff like that did not have air conditioning, because it usually does not get hot enough in some of those areas to even need an air conditioning. So it was a really hot summer as it pertains to the West. We had that cool dome. Once again, it dominated the Southeast. Well, I call it cool, but it was around average to slightly below average temperature-wise over that course of the summer down in the South. But you could see that in the northern half of the country, that's where there was warmer, at least warmer than average conditions, and was really warm in the western portions of the nation. Now, so far this year, we haven't finished August yet, but I can tell you so far, being in the mid-Atlantic, we're definitely been, last few days, cooler than typically it would be around this time of year. It's been downright gorgeous in the mid-Atlantic and northeast and areas of the Midwest over the last week and a half or so, or since August started. So when you compare that to what you saw in the other 2 years, you notice the heat is really boiled down, and it's here in the South and in the Southwest. Okay, so there's a differentiation. You can almost say that through this area in north and east, you've had a little bit of a reprieve, even though you see some positive ones or positive twos as you head off into areas of like New Jersey and around Boston. You see a little bit more. It's been a little warmer. Typically, it's a little warmer in the big cities, especially on the East Coast, than it is as you head farther away from the big cities. But for the most part, you could tell the cooler air is more focused to the Midwest, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic. It's been cooler there, and I believe that this will reflect the cooler temperatures that we've had this month so far, as we head on as we get more data in and they analyze the data for this month, next month. I think that we're really going to see what has been that the temperatures reflect that it's been cooler so far this year, overall this summer, than it has in prior summers. So at least in the northern half of the nation, northeastern half of the nation. So, just in review, right? Our projection is a moderate La Nina for the ESNO, and surprise, surprise, it's no big news for a lot of the weather people who've been watching what's going on with the weather. Uh, we predict a moderate La Nina. Some people have looked at the models and said it's trending towards a strong one, but it starts to trend back down as you head off into the winter. Um, I'm going with a precipice of right in the middle, about a moderate La Nina that's going to continue to weaken as the beginning of next year comes around. In a typical La Nina year, if you watched our last update, typical La Nina year, you have what you see right here. This is the polar jet stream that really controls the cooler air, and as we saw in the last graphic, this particular winter or this particular summer, the polar jet is nowhere around here. Okay, that's not what we're talking about, but you can kind of tell that it's been cooler than average in the areas that I just circled so far this summer, and it's been really wet. If you head off into areas of like Kentucky and Tennessee, we've had record flooding in a lot of those areas as well, and it's been dry and super dry as pertains to the Pacific Southwest and in the West. So there's a number of different factors that you have to consider in the winter, but when it comes to what a typical La Nina year would be, it appears as if we're kind of following that pattern, and there's a more defined definition of where maybe the colder air will be. So our preliminary winter outlook will be out early September. We're not going to give you a date. We're just going to do the best we can to get this content out there to you. We hope you enjoyed this update. The next one will be about a week or so from now. And what we're going to do is we're going to lead up to all the things that we've discussed so far this year. And then we'll lead in the following one will be about our preliminary winter outlook. So thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this, and we hope that you enjoy the weather, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your week. All right, take care, guys.